Hi, everybody, and welcome to Module 7. I already have opened the Module 7 file that goes with our text, and I've already done the first couple steps in the text. So I've opened up to the media log worksheet here, and I have already filled in the two columns that we were looking at. So here we do have a table that we're using. So when you fill in your engagements column, we're just using the sum function here. And we're summing up the first few columns here, I guess. So from views through shares. And you can see that we're still clicking and dragging the same way we always have, but you'll notice that slight change in notation there because we are in the table format. And then when I hit enter, it will fill in the entire column all the way down. And the same thing for my engagement rating here. So the engagement rating is your total engagements here. So my K column, and then we're dividing that by the number of followers in E. And again, you'll see that even though I'm doing the same process here, just using my regular formulas, you see that slightly different notation because we are in, we're using a table. And then again, I hit enter and it automatically populates the whole way down. So it makes it really nice and easy. The other things I've already done is I've gone to worksheet lookup tables, and I've already filled in the chart here. So we have different ratings for engagement rates. So that last piece that we just filled in were for engagement rates. And they consider anything basically between 0 and 0.5 to be poor. Once you hit 0.5 up to 1, it was average. Once you hit 1 up to 1.5, that would be good. Anything higher than 1.5 or 1.5 and higher up to 2 is very good. And then anything above 2 would be excellent. So what we're doing here in our engagement rates, and this is actually pretty important, is that we're putting our lower bounds for all of our rates here. So they really would be a range. You know, for instance, poor would be 0% up through 0.5%, but not including 0.5. So, you know, you can think of it sort of as 0.49999, etc. percent. And then our next group is really 0.5% up till almost 1%. So 0.9999, for instance, percent. So we actually do have ranges here. So our poor range is anything below 0.5. Our average range is between 0.5 but below 1. The good range starts at 1 and goes up to 1.5 and so on. So you do have this idea of, you know, some parts have equality, some parts are strictly less than or greater than. So you do want to be a little careful. So these are our lower bounds where the next group would jump up. And I just want to go through the different lookup functions that we've seen before and introduce a new one here as well. So for instance, let's say I want my engagement rate to be 1.83%. Okay, and I would like to look up what the grade would be. And by grade, I mean, is that poor, average, good, very good, and excellent. Now, of course, this is a pretty small table. I can just figure that out on my own. 1.83% would be bigger than 1.5, but less than 2. So I'm expecting a very good rating here or grade here. But again, when we have lots of data and large sets, we don't want to have to comb through it all by ourselves, right? So our lookup functions are really helpful. One other thing I do want to note that I did do as well before we keep going is now that I have my table set up, I did select my table and then I did go to my formulas tab and then I hit create from selection and create from selection. And then I chose not the column, I chose the top row because that's where the name of that table or the headers of that table occurred. And I did hit OK. So it does include those headers now. Excel's recognizing those as headers in a table. So when you see formulas, you'll see the engagement rates and engagement grade words there instead. So that's another little tip there. So far what we've used so far is VLOOKUP. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that as well. So you can either start typing it in, or if you want, you go up here to your lookup references again and scroll down. You can see that we do have somewhere, there it is, VLOOKUP. So you can either practice just typing in these formulas as you go, or if you like to bring up this larger screen here, you can. So VLOOKUP allows us to look up data vertically. So in a column, the V stands for vertical, which I think I kind of didn't really spend too much time on before, but that's what the V is for. It's to look up things in a column, so vertically instead. So what we'd be doing here is our lookup value is this 1.83%, right? That's what we would like to know. Okay, what would the grade be for 1.83% there, excuse me. So I have that piece in place there. And then I'm going to select where I'm looking up this information. So my table array, I'm going to select my entire table. And then the other thing I want to clarify here with VLOOKUP, because we're going to be doing a lot with kind of lookup functions in this section, is that VLOOKUP will automatically look in the first column. So 1.83% here fits in the first column, so it's perfectly fine. But if my value was not in the first column of my table, then VLOOKUP is not going to be very helpful. So VLOOKUP does rely on using that first column as sort of the main column there for the lookup features. Now, the other thing that I do want to put in here is which column I'm referencing of the table for my output, right? So I would like it to output the words in the second column of the table, right? I would like it to tell me if it's poor, average, good, very good, or excellent here. So I'm looking for that as well. Okay. Now, the last piece here is we are going to allow for some flexibility. So the other VLOOKUP functions we always have done have been exact matches, right? We want exactly 1.83. That's not going to happen here. If you look, I don't have exactly 1.83 as one of my engagement rates, right? It's really more of a range of values. So I do not want to use an exact match here. In the past, we would use an exact match. We would use that word false afterwards to make sure that is exactly that value. So here we're not going to use exact match. We're going to use an approximate match. So you could use the word true here instead. And that reminds you down here, right? So an exact match would be false. True is for a closest match. And it's closest match by going smaller than it. So it is in ascending order here. So notice how our table is in ascending order, which is important in this case. And we do need ascending order when we're talking about an approximate match. I don't need that for an exact match, but if I'm going approximate, I do need it to be in order because it does actually check things and it's going to look for 1.83, or if not 1.83, the nearest value smallest to it when I'm in an ascending order here. So that's really what I'm looking for in this case. And I'm going to hit OK. And there is the very good. So again, this one I think is a little bit tougher. The exact match I think is a little bit more straightforward, right? It's just finding that exact value and then spitting out whatever output you want here. Here, because I am not looking for an exact match, right? 1.83 is not in this table that I've given. We know that really these values represent a range, right? But Excel doesn't have that information in its background. We have that information. So we're looking for an approximate match here. So that does change it a little bit. You're using that true statement there. We're still spitting out column 2, but again, what it's going to do, it's going to give us the closest value that it can find to 1.83 or less than it. So that's why it's pulling the 1.5 here. And again, notice how we are in ascending order there. Now, if your data was not in a column, let's say it was in a row instead, you would do something very similar, but your formula there would be HLOOKUP instead. I'm not going to go through an example here because my data is in columns, but if you had your data again in rows, so maybe the engagement rates were going this way and then the grades were underneath them, you could use HLOOKUP, which searches horizontally. So it allows you to select a row to search rather than a column instead. So that's another tool that we can kind of just keep in our back pocket if our data is organized that way instead. Now, another lookup feature here, and this one is actually really helpful, is XLOOKUP. So it's right there. XLOOKUP is a more updated way to do VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. It's kind of nice because it allows you to choose column or row, so you're not limited to kind of picking that specific formula to start with. And it also allows you to not have to choose the first column of a table to have your data in that you're trying to look for. So again, it's a little bit more of an updated function, but it works very similarly to VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. So it really depends on preference here. Some people may prefer, if you've been using Excel for a long time and you're pretty comfortable with VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP, then you could keep using those. But if you're newer to Excel, it's good to know all the functions, but HLOOKUP you may find more helpful. Again, it's a little bit more updated. So it does have some pros for that reason. Again, one, because you could choose columns or rows, so you're not limited to one or the other. The lookup values do not have to be in the first column. They could be in any column of the table or any row of the table, which again makes things a lot easier there. If your data is not, if you're trying to look for values that are kind of more in the middle of the table instead of the first column or the first row as well. Lookup values don't necessarily have to be in ascending order. There's different ways that we can do that there, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. And again, it's just a little bit more updated of a feature. So let me show you how to do it here. And again, you can just type it if you want. If you're pretty good at following directions, you can follow here. Or if you prefer, you can go ahead and use that lookup reference tab under the formulas and scroll down and use HLOOKUP. And then again, it brings up that larger box, which you may find a little bit easier. It gives a little bit more information. So the first thing is my lookup value. So I'm still looking for that 1.83%. I'm going to do the same exact thing I just did with VLOOKUP, but show you how HLOOKUP works instead. Now, when I select my lookup array, I'm not going to select the entire table. I'm going to select specifically either the column or row that I'm trying to find this value in. So my 1.83% occurs in my B column here, right? So you actually could select B4 through B9, excuse me. Let's fix that. Or if you want to just do the numbers B5 through B9, they actually will both work here. So you can kind of play around and try different ones out. My return array here is going to be the engagement grade. So again, I want to return whatever word is appropriate in this case. Now, it does let me put in a word or a number, whatever I want to, if a value is not found. So let's say I'm looking something up and I don't find it in the table. You actually could write in something like, not found, for instance, and then it would spit out that word instead of leaving it as an error or not applicable, or you could put it in as a blank even if you want to. So if you want to put it as a blank, you could just leave this blank. Or if you're typing it, you would put it in as quote space quote. So you'd show it as a quote, a space in between there as well. Now, the match mode is where it gets a little bit weird. So this is something that is worth noting, and I do recommend that you read through your text here. So I'm going to kind of read it through with you, but again, I highly recommend you take a note of your text here on the different match modes. So if you type in 0, that would be an exact match. So that would be like we did with VLOOKUP, but having that false note there. So a 0 is an exact match. We're not doing an exact match here, again, because I don't have exactly 1.83. I'm doing ranges of values. So -1, what that does is it gives you an exact match, but if none is found, it returns the next smaller value. So that -1 for match mode will make it work exactly like VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP. So again, it will look for an exact match, but if it can't find one, it will return the next smallest value. If you use match of +1, it will return the next largest value, so it'll bump it up instead of down. And then match 2, it does allow us to use wildcards and other things as well. So remember, a wildcard can be used if we're trying to just match maybe the first couple letters of a word. So maybe I'm looking for a name and I type in SM. So all names that start with SM would come up, for instance. So there's a wildcard feature there as well, which we haven't talked too much about really, but it has been in your text a little bit here or there. So there is that feature too. And then I can go ahead and hit OK. Oops, and let's see where my mistake is. All right, so I hit C12 for my value lookup there. I'm looking in, oh, there we go, B19. That looks better. So there, you can even see I had a little error when I was typing. I put B19, not B9. So that was my error, as I had given it too many columns here, which didn't make sense, right? It had empty columns beyond the table. So that is our formula. And again, we're getting the same exact result of that VLOOKUP. So I do think maybe HLOOKUP takes a little bit of getting used to, particularly if you're used to XLOOKUP takes a little bit of getting used to, particularly if you're used to VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP already. But it is pretty nice. It's kind of nice too, because you don't have to count up the columns as well, like you wouldn't in a V or HLOOKUP. You can just select where you want it to look and then what you want your output range to be and kind of go from there. So it is a really nice tool, and one that I think is probably being used more and more nowadays, again, as it's a more upgraded tool compared to the original two. I do again recommend that you look in your text so for some of these. So there's really a lot that we can do with this. And again, keeping those match options in mind are important there too.